I'll tell you about Open Eco Homes a little. And we've been running tours of Cambridge area eco homes for the last 10 years. And it's where hosts are generously showing visitors physically around their homes and showing how their homes are low carbon, beautiful, comfortable, energy saving, all the right things. But this is our first online tour. And so we'll be keen to see how this goes and keen to have your feedback at the end. And so I'm really delighted that Mark's offered to give us this online tour and show his self-built home, because he's been thinking about these things and investigating and writing about them in the House Builder's Bible since 1993. It's the House Builder's Bible, the most popular book of its kind in UK, is in its 13th edition. So Mark and Mandy's delightful home is based on decades of his experience, plus centuries more experience from the team that he's assembled to design and build it. So I expect this is going to delight and inspire you the way I've been really inspired by Mark's tour before. So enjoy.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I'm unmuted. Okay, I've split the slideshow into 3 sections. First, we've got the background of the build and the architectural ideas that went into the house. And secondly, look at the build process itself, highlighting some of the eco features incorporated in the house. And finally, look at the why and the how, some of the finished details. The aim is to finish around 7:30. If we overshoot a little, that's probably okay, depending on the amount of interaction. We may or may not get to, no, we'll definitely get to the last slide. On with the slideshow. This is our self-built home in Sedgwick Street, Cambridge, where we moved in 2018. Sedgwick Street, for those who don't know, is a one-way street off Mill Road, not far from Cambridge Station. It's very urban, and for the romantics amongst you, you'll be delighted to learn that our self-built story is framed within a love story. 2 60-somethings met and hit it off big time in 2014, and we were basking in the delights of newfound romance. And within weeks of meeting, and we would talk about making a home together. I'd spent a lifetime in working in and around home building, as Tom's just introduced me as. Mandy was a family therapist about to retire. We had both had families, sharing 5 children, 3 grandchildren between us, and we wanted somewhere that they could all be entertained and stay over. Then in September that year, shortly after getting together, Rightmove carried just one listing of a warehouse on Sedgwick Street. Offers above 250,000, it said, no planning permission, but potential for a new house. Shall we go and have a look? I asked Mandy, she said, why not? And so we got on our bikes, went over and investigated. And here is what we found. There we go. This is the warehouse as it stood. Now, turning that into a home would be some challenge. And right then I felt like a challenge. I had the cash available from a recent house sale, and so we had the wherewithal to execute a quick purchase. Mandy was game, and we agreed to purchase it there and then. We actually shook hands on the deal outside the warehouse on our first visit. Now, that arguably was a very reckless act. Buying a dilapidated warehouse with no side access on a narrow and sometimes busy one-way street with no planning permission, without knowing who the neighbours were, it all had the potential of a disaster in the making. But the gods have favoured our sense of adventure because it worked out fine, even though it took us 4 years to turn this odd neglected space into a home. Here's an aerial view of what we bought. You can see from this that there's a garden. I don't know if you can all see the cursor. The back end of it actually had a proper garden, and we really wanted a garden, even though what was there resembled nothing more than a rubbish tip. Now, the only condition placed on the sale by the vendor was that we should build an eco house. The vendor assessed the bids, and we won through on the basis of my long-term interest in energy efficient housing. Just what an eco house meant in practice was left open, and just what we would build was something that had yet to take shape in our minds. One of the complexities I hadn't bargained for was the fact that North Romsey, which is where this site is situated, had recently become a conservation area. And whilst the conservation department weren't wanting us to save the building, there really wasn't much to save there, they did want to see what we planned to put in its place before consenting to demolition. I had hoped to do it the other way around, to demolish and clear the site, then survey and plan a course of action. Now, I may know a bit about the building process, but I'm no designer, and this was never going to be a straightforward house, so it was obvious that we required some professional help here. We needed an architect on board, much earlier in the process than I'd hoped for. We did a few inquiries and quickly settled on using Mole, the practice run by Meredith Bowles, who I'd known for some time and whose work I really like. They recently moved their office into Cambridge, and this added to the attraction. What we wanted was to create a new eco-home, but one with a bit of a wow factor. At the same time, it would fit into the street and look like it lived there. That pretty much was the brief. Now, the architect started by looking at the extremely surprisingly wide variety of houses that existed around in the neighbourhood. We particularly liked the one at the top left, Argyle House, which just happens to be around the corner on St Philip's Road. It was the first house to be built in this neighbourhood, and we felt ours was probably going to be the last. So there was some sort of simpatico between them. We also noted that it was gable onto the street, just like the warehouse. But we started by throwing some ideas around about what we might put in, and here are 3 ideas. We particularly like the one at the top, which we quickly nicknamed the ziggurat. We said, let's render it and see what it looks like. So they got the old rendering machine out and came out with this brick built thing, which actually is a stunning looking thing, but somehow we didn't think that was going to fit in Romsey very well. It was a bit like too Yemeni for Romsey. So that idea gently got binned. And instead we ploughed on through more iterations and came up with what essentially we built. They turned this into a model which we used to consult with the neighbours and also to show to the planners. It's not an easy, simple shape, and this is because we have to keep 2 things in mind. Firstly, we couldn't overpower the neighbours on the St Philip's Road, the 7 neighbours on St Philip's Road side, because the old warehouse was not as high as the ridge we'd put. So we had to flatten the ridge so that they could still see the chimney of the house next door. That somehow gave up the sense that we weren't overpowering the situation. Secondly, we had to preserve light for the neighbour on the north side. That meant we could only have a double section at the front, had to lower the middle section and have these little step-ins so that they could get light into their windows here. It also meant we had to have light coming in overhead. We couldn't have windows on this side or on the other side, other than very small shaded windows. So overhead light became a very important feature here. Finally, we're going to delight you with a walkthrough video. Let's hope it all works for everybody. But this is what you see when you come down from St Philip's Road. Our house is on the left here. And you can actually see the chimneys above it. So it does sort of fit in with the streetscape. First thing to notice is the zinc roof we've got there with the 7 inset solar panels and the 2 Veluxes lighting the upstairs bathroom. Then your attention is drawn by the louvered cedar, and particularly the shadow gap on that corner, very neat. And then the eye is drawn by the bin store, which is a little feature we added at the end. It's a miniature dry garden, and yes, those are dinosaurs roaring around there. The children in the street love stopping there. We've got the bikes under the overhang, and you stand back and you get the full gable on vision here, with the 2 front windows separated by a bit of copper panelling. In we go through the front door. Hope everyone's not freezing on this. The layout is really very simple. It's just one corridor with 3 rooms opening off it. The camera will take a peek in the middle room. This is our downstairs wet room. Lots of grey, blue Molianos limestone there, and all on the ground floor. As we go in, we come into the kitchen area, and suddenly the open roof light is revealed, bringing light into the kitchen. And hopefully pan up and see. It was a lovely day. It was last week I filmed this, and beautiful day, and that's just the fixture that makes the whole sort of area light up. You step back under the vaulted room, a quicker spin round to have a look down to the front of the house, that you can see that the people going past the front door and the corridor. and finally out into the rear living room area. And this is the vaulted ceiling, the underside of the vaulted ceiling, which we had fun with doing this boarded Douglas fir. More on that later in the presentation. We step out through the triple glazed, triple sliding doors onto the patio. Some reason I'm featuring on the fencing here, which is nothing more than Ridgeon's roof batten. Look down at the now mature garden. I pan round at the first of the raised bed with our apricot tree, and now roughly halfway down the plot, which is more or less where the old warehouse came to. And on down to the garden, we have featured a clothesline, a very 1950s feature that we both wanted and really enjoy and use a lot. And down at the end is the studio from where I'm speaking to you at the moment. And down the left, we've got you'll see the little hedgehog gate and the fence. We have a nightly visit from a hedgehog. There's one on the other side, so you can get out as well. And finally, a pan around to the raised bed, the rhubarb we're already eating, the tool shed, the flashback to the house showing the two roofs. You can see how they meld together, the upper and the lower roof, both clad with this louvered cedar. With that, we can have a quick break, and any feedback or questions, we've got a few minutes to ask. I'll hopefully remove the shared screen. Very well. There we are, we're back in business. What's the feedback, Tom?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. Many years ago, there was a radical independent bookshop in Cambridge called Grapevine.
I remember
When it went bust,
yep.
Everything that was left was taken to the warehouse that is now your home. So my question is, was there still a load of Grapevine stuff in your warehouse?
not that I remember. There was some stuff from the Women's Resources Centre and stuff from Cambridge Central Library that has never been returned. The most amazing amount of stuff in there, but I didn't notice any Grapevine books in there.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Joanna had it stuffed to the gunnels, and it'd been pretty full for about 30 years with very little happening, and the roof had been leaking, so the contents weren't in great condition. Any other?
Yes, do we have any other questions at this stage? Otherwise, we can move on to part two.
We'll carry on with part two, shall we?
Great, over to you, Mark.
Mark, I've been really enjoying the fact that we can hear the bird song.
Can you?
Yeah, it's really atmospheric.
There's a blackbird just gone into action, and we've got rather a lot of pigeons cooing, but yeah, with a bit of luck, we might hear too many of the neighbours going around tossing things over the fence. Yeah, shut up, you know, whatever. But anyway, let's carry on with the I'll still go back to shared screen and see if we can get back onto my PowerPoint presentation. Here we go, the next slide. This part, we're going to look at how we did the building and why we built what we built. How did we get from this situation in July 2016, which is when we won planning permission, which is, to moving in 2 years later? Well, it took a lot of work, a lot of help, and a lot of money. I'll talk you through some of the highlights. The first thing we had to do was obviously demolish the warehouse. This is what it looked like on day two after we'd stripped all the asbestos off the top. And that's Mandy there in her sandals. She'd done most of the work herself. No, she hadn't. We'd gone around to have a look in the evening, and this has been done by Jacksons, who did a very good job. After a week, we had the thing down. We actually had back to where I'd hoped to be 18 months earlier, and have a flattened site. Then you could see we were standing just at the back of the gatehouse, looking through into the towards Sedgwick Street. By this time, of course, we had a plan, and we had planning permission, albeit with many conditions, 18 in number. One was that we had to investigate for contaminated ground because we were developing a brownfield site. This introduced a new delay of around 4 months, during which time we drilled holes, sent samples off for analysis, and then waited and waited, only to discover that there were rather more heavy metals down there than we expected. So we had to excavate even deeper and introduce some certified clean soil, which was that lovely red stuff, came from Bedfordshire, complete with Brussels sprouts, which started sprouting while it was down there. It was November, it was 5 months later before we'd actually start building. Because of the restricted access, we had to start at the back and work forward. The garden studio, the one I'm speaking to you from, went in first, thanks to my space in Norfolk Street, followed by the fencing, and then we started filling it up with bricks and sand. During this time, Mole, this is Meredith Bowles, the main man behind Mole there. They were working on the detailed technical drawings, helping us as we worked through some of the pre-commencement planning conditions. This was the brick panel. This is one of them. The council wanted to see the bricks we were going to use and the mortar, and were ready for inspection. All the while we were liaising with Potton Homes, who we'd chosen to build the SIPS panel superstructure. By April 2017, we were finally underway on the main house. Here are some of the action shots on the groundworks. I was there every day, cycling over from Chesterton, pausing briefly to get married to Mandy at the Cambridge Union on my 64th birthday. The honeymoon was 4 nights in Italy, and then back on site, sort of supervising what was going on and making sure it didn't all go wrong. Interesting enough, this is what the site looked like in July 2017, thanks to Google Earth satellite imagery, which my neighbour found 2 days ago. She said, this is what turns up, it's still there. But it's interesting because it actually shows you how we've got the site organised at that time. There's the studio and the little shed, there's the bricks, and we've got the groundworks laid out. And you can see that is more or less the structure of the old warehouse. It's actually a very simple structure. The open kitchen opens at the back, and the rooms opening off it are there. Now this house is designed to use very little energy, but it's not quite a passive house, which is widely regarded as the gold standard for low energy building. Passive house is essentially a recipe for designing low energy homes. A passive house must have lots of insulation, triple glazing, it must be very airtight, it must have few, if any, thermal bridges. It also requires mechanical ventilation. It's very much an engineering solution to the issue of what an eco house might or might not be. There are lots of numbers and huge spreadsheets to work through to get the levels required. The thing is, it works, but it's much easier to do on some houses than others. Ours presented a couple of problems. We had restricted width, you can see that here, we were building right up to the boundaries, and that was just 6 meters overall. So the extra insulation was at the expense of internal room sizing, which was an issue because only the room at the back of the house is spoilt for space. The front rooms are actually quite tight. We also have a very complicated form because we've got this, as you remember the model with these rather indentations at the back of the house. We've ended up with no less than 19 external surfaces, whereas the ideal is about 7. This is really all a bit suboptimal from an energy perspective. So we decided we wouldn't actually go to passive house standard, but we would use the principles of passive house to guide our designs. We set a challenging energy target known as the low energy building standard. Here's in fact what we came up with on the ground floor. The floor is a beam and block floor, which is insisted on by the structural engineers, but it has masses of foam insulation tucked above it, built under the screed. The walls are made of SIPS panels. This is what this is here. SIPS stands for structural insulated panels. It's a form of timber frame construction which gets its strength from sandwiching slabs of insulation between layers of oriented strand board. It's both energy efficient and it's space efficient because it's roughly 90% insulation and relatively thin, making it ideal for a restricted width. The SIPS panels incorporate 120 millimeters of insulation within the 140 millimeter panel, and outside that is 70 millimeters of Kingspan cool therm insulation. Now this alone, the panel itself is enough to meet building regulations, so this is over and above the call of duty to get a much better energy performance. The critical thermal bridge detail between the floor and the walls is dealt with by having, this is the screed where the heat of the house is. There's insulation there. We have a lightweight Celcon block there, and down in the cavity we've got styrofoam insulation. So there is a thermal bridge through there, but it's quite small, and we've addressed it as well as we can. Let's have some action shots of the SIPS. Here are a couple of slides that show the superstructure coming together, a process which took several weeks. We were lucky to have an alternative route for traffic coming down Sedgwick Street, so we were able to close the site for hours at a time without causing major difficulties for everybody. Here you can see the remarkable flying jib crane, which came from Whitstable every day. It came about 7 or 8 visits. It could lift 7 meters into the air and 25 meters back from the lorries. So that's how most of the bulk arrived. And these wonderful sailing packets of timber and panelling flying high over the rooftops. Luckily, we didn't cause any damage. And here you see the SIPS panel structure going up. On the top left-hand corner is the lower roof with its vaulted ceiling. You can actually see how the panels work with the insulation wrap between the OSB boarding. This top right hand is the bedroom space at the top of the house, at the front of the house. These are the 2 windows you see overlooking the street with the copper paneling between them. And the bottom slide is having got the structure more or less together, by which time we were ready to pot and sort of bade farewell, and we took over the site. This would be about October, November 2017. Now this slide was taken just before Christmas 2017. The glazing is already in, the floor insulation and the damp-proof membrane are complete, and the underfloor heating pipes are laid. Here we are seeing the liquid floor screed coming in this big tube, about to be pumped in over the floor for a 45 millimeters screed. An amazing process, quite new to me. It took about 2.5 hours to do the whole ground floor. My triple glazing slide. It's a key part of the plan, but it's hard to photograph well. The one on the left shows you what a triple glazed window is. Surprise, surprise, it's got 3 panes of glass in, and it's a rather fat, chunky looking window. Whilst the one on the right is the one going into our bedroom window, another sliding sash window. Perhaps of more interest here are the various tapes you can see. The blue tape is fitted by the window fitters, and it seals between the window and the plywood base that we built. You can just see it between the 2 tapes that we built around the opening, so that we could that would seal the window to the plywood. And the green tape is our work. It seals the plywood base itself to the walls. It's all part of the effective airtightness detailing. Another key part in the strategy. Airtightness is one of the very few qualities that you can measure on site. You can do this with a blower door test, standard way of doing it. And we did this twice during the build, once at this stage when we just enclosed it, and once on completion. To do this, you put the interior under 50 pascals of pressure, which really isn't very much, it's just enough to get a reading, and you measure the flow rate required to hold this pressure. From this, you derive an airtightness score. Passive House looks for an airtightness score of 0.6 air changes per meter square per hour under this pressure. Our final score was 1.0, not quite as good. In fact, it may sound like abject failure, but bear in mind the average new build home scores between 5 and 10, and the proposed building regulations target for 2025 is only 8, so we're 8 times better than this. I think it says more about the failure of our building regulations than it does about the standard we hit. It reflected in our energy performance certificate, which was issued on completion. This gives a prediction of the overall energy use in a home against which you can measure your success or otherwise. We achieved a very good score. I very much hope we did. We're disappointed we hadn't. And our post-occupancy monitoring suggests that we're in a whisker of achieving these predicted outcomes. But one of the features I want you to notice is that we used a gas boiler to heat the underfloor heating and the hot water. That, in retrospect, was the biggest mistake. We should have installed a heat pump. Our design brief had emphasised the so-called fabric first approach. This eschews green bling like heat pumps and solar panels, spending money on insulation, glazing and airtightness instead. Having done this, the argument goes, you simply don't need to spend good money on heat pumps because you've reduced the demand for energy so much that any energy you consume will be infinitesimally small. Whilst that may not be quite true, it does pretty much summarize my thinking back in 2015-16 when we were formulating the plans. There was also the fact that electricity was still a pretty dirty form of fuel back then, far worse on carbon emissions than mains gas. So in our quest to reduce carbon emissions, there's a logic in fitting a gas boiler here. But 4 years on, due in large part to the dramatic growth in North Sea wind farms, the carbon intensity of electricity is now usually less than gas. And that makes it a compelling case for using it for electric heating for all homes and all hot water. And were I to build the house again today, I'd definitely go for a heat pump, because grid electricity is now the greenest fuel out there. But we're saddled with a gas boiler, albeit a state-of-the-art condenser. It'll be much harder to replace with electric heating as and when the time comes. Other regrets? Well, I'd have loved to have got to full passive house standard, but it wasn't to be on this house. We would have built a structure that saved an additional 1,250 kilowatt hours of energy a year, equivalent to the output of about 5 solar PV panels. Bearing this in mind, I softened my aversion to green bling and installed solar PV to make up the difference. We've only got 7 panels. We would have liked more, but the lower roof is shaded by trees and the upper roof would only take 7. Note also that our final, I don't know if you can see this, the EPC, our final EPC score is 93 against the possible maximum of 94. Why is this? It's because we didn't fit solar thermal panels. Well, we couldn't because there wasn't any room on the roof. However, we did fit this little beauty. I don't know if we knew these, but this is an iBoost diverter. What it does, it senses when electricity comes from the PV panels on the roof and is being exported to the grid, and instead it switches or diverts the current into an immersion heater on the hot water tank. So that the surplus power is used to heat our hot water in daytime. It mimics what a solar thermal panel does, only using electricity rather than piped water. Is it successful? In a good month, it diverts something like 100 kilowatt hours into the tank, enough for about half our hot water usage. If we had the full 16 panels, many people put on a roof, it would deliver more or less the same as a solar thermal panel would. Another key to passive house style building is to install mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. It's the only bit of the recipe that requires power for a motor to drive the fan. Or if you can see this, so you can actually see the power usage in this row is 12 watts, 24 watts, and 40 watts. Normally the default is we have it switched to 24, so it's running 24/7, but only burning 24 watts of power. Pretty minimal. We plumbed for the Paul Nova system sold by the Green Building Store, and their service starts with a design. This is it. The heart of the system is this red box here. This is the heat recovery unit. External air is drawn in into the box, filtered and then warmed by the exhaust air as it's routed past one another in the heat exchanger. It emerges, capturing 90% of the outgoing heat, and is then pumped around the house through the blue tubes, and then gradually circulated the house and drawn back out in the green pipes, back into the heat pump and out. So the whole thing is ideal to get the air circulating gently around the house. That's in a nutshell how it works. By and large, we're pretty happy with it, although it struggles to keep us cool in the summer. We're back to purged ventilation with lots of windows open. It seems to work fine in winter. It does the job in summer. We need drafts as well to help. Here you see the 2 external vents that are in the passageway that feed the MVHR system. Sorry, mechanical ventilation and heat recovery. I keep slipping into acronyms. And here you see there's a slide showing some of the complexities of installing it. It's not easy to put it in the house because these aluminium tubes are so big. They also a lot of it have silence in there as well. So it has to be pre-planned beforehand in great detail. And actually Potten took all of this when they're doing their technical drawings and included a lot of it, including drilling holes through steel joists to where we're going to run this pipe. It's something you build the house around. It's something you cannot add as an afterthought. You're running with a new house, you build it around the MVHR piping. I'm going to finish with another video sequence here. This is me. We have showing you, this is the tank itself taking off the filter. I'm going to show you what goes into a filter, what a filter looks like after 3 months. We put this in just at the beginning of lockdown, a pollen filter, completely white and clean. And this was after 3 months, last week. This is what it filled up with. That's quite remarkable, really. Hopefully it's got all the COVID bugs in there as well, but who knows? We've been fine, so hopefully it has. Turn a quick spin around the inside of the plant room. You can see the inverter from the PV. Look down there, you can see the manifolds for the underfloor heating. There's the boiler, and finally the 250 litre hot water tank that we use. It's much bigger than we need. We use it as a hot water battery. Because we've got solar heat that can then heat it up. The two of us could probably do with a tank half that size, but so we heat it up, and hopefully we don't have any gas to burn it. On weather like this, we won't be using any gas at all. We'll probably go through days and days and days before the gas comes on to heat any hot water. That's the end of the technical session. Any feedback, any question from there?
Right, so we've got quite a few questions. If I can ask, first of all, if I can ask Say Minishtiak to ask the first question, followed by Jonathan Griffiths.
My question was about how long it took to get planning permission. Was that reasonably straightforward?
It was both straightforward, but also very lengthy. It took us from the moment we started talking with the architects in February. It took us a year or 16 months in total, and we talked with them. We did a couple of iterations. We went through a pre-qualifying pre-app meeting process with them, which is incredibly slow. That we went to them and then we expected an answer in a couple of weeks. It actually took 4 months to get the answer back. Basically, they were pretty happy with what we were doing. We spent a lot of time working with the neighbours to make sure they weren't too upset about it, because it's a very, we've got actually 7, 8, 9 neighbours immediately on the boundary, so you can't really plough in. You've got to work with them. And basically, it was so slow, largely because the planners were so overworked. There's a frequent problem here in Cambridge, where there's far more work than there are planners. But it wasn't a particularly controversial process, and when we got to planning, it went through 6-0. The planners were very happy with it.
And then I think Jonathan Griffiths, you wanted to ask about project management.
Yes, it was just a quick question about the build process. I was interested as to whether you managed the build yourself or whether you hired a professional to manage the project. I'd be interested just to ask a little bit more.
I'm going to cover that in the final section of the talk, if you like. So I do cover that specifically, what I did, how much process. But essentially, I did manage it. Yeah.
Great. All right. Then we'll leave it to the last section.
Yeah.
Thanks.
The actual superstructure, the bit that Potton did, they take that over and had nothing to do with it except come in and look at it every now and then. But every other aspect of the build, I was very much on top of it. Yeah.
Thanks.
David Collett wanted to ask about foundations. David? Do we still have David?
Sorry. Yes, just wondering what kind of foundations are needed. And
I can't hear you, David.
Oh, sorry. As you're using SIP panels, did that mean that your foundations didn't have to be as deep or as expensive?
I don't think it made any difference at all. They do calculations based on the load of the superstructure. Sorry, can you hear that? We actually have a brick skin done.
Frozen.
Looks like Mark's freezing at the moment. I hope his internet is going to revive. Oh dear. Are you there, Mark?
Both sides of the.
So, Mark, you've just your internet's giving up. We can't hear you at the moment. So I'll get ready to. I could share the final part of the presentation while Mark talks to it on just audio, maybe.
Guess turn off the video.
Are we there?
Yep. Yeah, we've had trouble. You've had dropouts. I suggest maybe if you turn to just video, just shut off your video.
I'm back on.
It's okay.
Yep.
Let's try that.
Yep.
And let me find. Okay.
asking a question about foundations. I think it froze then. Is that right?
It did.
Yeah. The answer was that it didn't make any difference to foundations. No, they were quite elaborate and extensive.
Was it on clay and was it piling?
No, there's no piling. It is on clay, but it's fairly good ground. And actually, we didn't find anything. You know, particularly when you're doing brownfield work, you kind of find a well or a sump or something. There was nothing like that. You know, we were quite lucky, other than getting contaminated ground in the garden, which caused us. That was a delay as well. About 4 months to sort that out.
What were the foundations? I'm so sorry, we dropped out, our internet dropped out and we missed what the foundations were. Were they raft or if they weren't piling?
No, they're just strip foundations, trench fill strip foundations with a lot of packing on the inside, you know, polystyrene packing to stop sideways movement. And we had to tank them because we're quite low, and it's actually, although it looks flat, there's a slight slope on the side, and for one side, we did a lot of tanking on them, which was quite interesting and extensive, and we did a lot of that ourselves actually. So, yeah, but there weren't anything particularly unusual. It was all, we had a structural engineer on board, and we just did what they said, and there was nothing particularly unusual about it.
So, Mark, can I say, Mark, I think we need to get on to your final section.
Okay.
So, do you want to try?
Start video again?
Well, maybe you should try presenting it. But if you drop out, then I'll share my screen of it.
Okay, all right. Let's look at some prettier stuff now. Look at some of the unusual finishes we achieved. Are we there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
First, the louvered cedar, which is one of the most striking features of the house. I'd never seen it before, but Mulwer practiced hands at it. And I'd said to Meredith that one of my pet hates was panels of cedar cladding affixed to walls at great height in order to say something sustainable. I'm not quite sure what. They discolour within months and frequently look very awful very quickly. So why not produce a timber feature that didn't discolour and improves with age? This was the result. The key to getting to look good was aligning these sawtooth fillets. I'm getting quite a lot of feedback on. Is that someone coming in on who isn't muted or? No? Fine, okay, I'll carry on. Just ignore it. Getting these sawtooth fillets right, no mean feat in itself. The timber was machined by Millworks in Bottisham and treated with organowood, which is, as well as providing some fire and rot protection, also does a bit of pre-aging on the wood, so it starts to look like.
So I think we've lost Mark there. Mark, yes, Mark, you're frozen.
10 years.
Mark,
Again.
I'm afraid you froze then. So
Okay.
if you can unshare your screen and turn off your video and give me instructions on next slide and things.
Yeah, the shadow gap down the corner there is very much concerned. It's something beautiful to behold, beautifully executed, thanks to very skilled craftsmen who took the architect's designs and ran with them. I haven't mentioned my role in building the house, and this is the answer to the question about what I did. I acted as the main contractor, hiring in trades as and when required. The superstructure, the slips panels, were built and erected by Potten, with very little input from me, but they handed over the site, and from then on I was responsible for organising the completion. Now that's a pretty common self-build route to take, especially when you're using factory-built superstructures. Self-build takes many forms, from people undertaking the vast bulk of the work themselves to getting a custom home builder to undertake the entire project on your behalf. The crucial factor is that the self-builder is the one paying the bills throughout, and that differentiates them from speculative builders who are building it to sell on. Now, I had one or two contacts in the building trade, having been active back in the 80s and 90s, but everyone working on site was new to me, and as so often happens, they introduced me to mates who introduced me to their other mates. Now, maybe I was lucky, but the standards were pretty high, and with very few exceptions. And the costs were pretty fair, I thought. Much of the later works were actually paid for on a day rate basis, which you've got to be very careful for, because you've got to keep your eye on a hawk that people aren't swinging the leg. The going rate for a tradesman is about £200 a day, and I don't think anyone swung the leg. Everyone was working a very full day's work. Some, like Duncan, were verging on the inspired. It also helped to have a fantastic set of working drawings from the architectural practice. It saved a huge amount of time when it came to organising the finishes. The overall budget was just over 500,000, including all the professional fees, the demolition works, the studio, and all the garden and external works. That was about 20% over our original budget, but this is almost down to elective extras, things we chose to spend money on during the process. Another slide, please, Tom, which is a good point to introduce the roof light in the kitchen. We ahed and ummed about this feature for months before plumping on a sliding roof design by Cantifix, which cost no less than £27,000. Ouch. That wasn't in the original budget, and we could have done it far cheaper, probably under 10,000. But we had to have overhead light here because there was no possibility of having conventional windows. We looked at using Velux opening skylights and thought, nope. We looked at several other suppliers, but we honestly couldn't make head nor tail of what they were trying to do. So we plumped for an option from Cantifix that was both triple glazed, it had to be, but it was also low G glass, which reflects heat away from the room below. It's like built-in shading. Overhead glazing often causes rooms beneath to bake in summer heat waves. We actually find that it pays to keep the roof light closed during the hours of peak sunshine because the reflection from the low G keeps the room cooler. And then we open up in the evening and let the breeze blow through. Next slide.
Are you there, Mark? Well, I think I'm going to carry on and say a few of the things I think he would have said.
Here you
are,
it's
Mark.
Stunning is what it looks like in the upstairs bedroom. Is it
Mark,
frozen?
We've missed a minute or so of you there when we got to this slide. So I'm really sorry about this, folks. I am going to just carry on and go through the rest of Mark's slides and tell you what little I know. And so this is the sliding roof feature. I think you can imagine the slides open and lets lots of sunlight in, and it doesn't let the rain in. Apparently it has an automatic rain sensor, so it shuts itself if they forget to shut it. And I hope, oh, here we are, sun pipes, Mark was telling us about, that let the sun in here. I think this is to an internal sort of room for storing their clothes and in a corridor. Oh yes, and so here is the clothes store. Not sure that's its name. And you can see it's really bright because of the sun pipe. Okay, and here is the bathroom. I wish we had Mark telling you. And these are the two south-facing Veluxes you see on the outside. And in practice, Mark told us about these door handles, which are some kind of cheap sliding door handle that looks really good everywhere, which he's delighted with. I hope he's going to come back soon. So I think he just mentioned this roof structure here. Is this Douglas fir, I think? I think it looks really stunning. And so this is the big kind of living room. It has this living, oh, Mark, hello. I'm describing this slide now, over to you.
Okay, fine. The Douglas fir ceiling is another detail we stumbled on. The architectural drawings didn't show any detail for this, so we just improvised. And Millworks, again, just happened to have some really nice Douglas fir. We thought, why not make it into a ceiling? We thought it'd have a real wow factor. We didn't realise quite how much, and every photographer that's been to the house, they focus in on the ceiling because it gives an amazing perspective effect when you look at it. Well, certainly from this angle. The timber was cut to 5 metre length, so there are no joints in it at all. Mandy and I sat in the garden, we livened the wood to take out the colour variations. Douglas fir can be very variable timber. And we calculated the shadow gap down to the nearest millimetre and said to the carpenters, just let rip in homage to all those 1980s matchboard ceilings and bathroom panels that we used to do. You can just make out, if you go to the next slide, the fine, I don't know if you can see the fine detailing, that's right, of the screws. There are 5 columns of screws all lined up, beautifully adapted like that to make it sort of look absolutely spiffo, you know. The detailing of the screws, the carpenters love doing this deal, it's sort of thing they really got into. One more ceiling slide, I think, and then I look down the house from the triple doors. You can see the way it works and how the staircase comes up off the corridor, and how the overhead light bathes the kitchen table, which is also have to be made of Douglas fir by Pete Higginson. Fantastic symmetry to it. A final look at the garden. There's a couple of slides on the garden there. We said we wanted very much to have a garden. That was more or less when we moved in 2018. The landscapers were put together, and what it looked like 2 years later. And we had a lot of fun in the garden. As far as we can tell, the history of the site, this was basically used as a storage site, maybe a lime pit for the Victorian builders when they were originally putting in Sedgwick Street and Cavendish Road in the 1890s. They were used this to store their stuff, and they never built on it. And it wasn't until about 40, 50 years later someone thought, I'm going to put up a warehouse here. And they never touched the garden. So it was like a rubbish tip from Victorian times when we came to try and clear it out. Now, normally these days, houses are built in back gardens, not with them. And a garden in a new house feels like an out-and-out luxury. But this is our 3rd summer in residence. It's already filling with flowers and shrubs and trees and vegetables. We decided on a formal rectangular layout because English country cottage really wasn't going to fit here. There's a raised lawn, 2 raised beds, 1 in brick, 1 in oak. And we initially aimed for a dry garden because we thought we might be away a lot. And after advice from gardening friends, then we went to trips to the Botanics Dry Garden. We went to the lovely Beth Chatto Gardens in Essex and learned up about them. But what happens in reality is that people keep giving us plants, and you can't very well not plant them. And anyway, it's curious to see what they do. So it's a fair smattering of randomly selected flowers and shrubs and lots of climbers all competing for those precious fence spaces. Maybe in time it'll be a little bit wilder, but for the time being it's a source of great delight just playing around with it and experimenting. With a living room that opens out onto a patio, you rather need something beyond the patio to bring it all to life. The house flows into the garden and they both feel like one special space. Last slide. Oh no, it's a couple of slides of the garden. There we are. Another one. That's the view from the roof. That's the raised bed, how it looks at the moment at the front. And finally, there's a shop. There's my my dry garden at the front with there's a dinosaur. You well picked him out. Our dinosaur garden. A final mention of my book. Last slide, Tom.
Oh yeah.
There we are. A good place to mention my writing work, which has kept me busy for 25 years, principally producing this book, The House Builder's Bible. The latest edition, number 13, includes lots of background information on the job, which isn't time to go into here. I was assiduously taking notes all through the building process. It's what I do. For those of you who don't know, the Bible's widely available at bookshops and on Amazon. We also have just started a website, Overload Books, which is our micro publishing business that also does 1 or 2 other books on self-build. So do visit our Overload Books website.
Yes, so we've got 2 quick questions. One from Helen Mulligan.
Yep.
Yep, Helen?
Could you just repeat, you mentioned about the kitchen table.
Yep.
And I think you mentioned who made that. If you could just...
Pete Higginson.
Pete Higginson.
He's a joiner he's got a workshop on Hope Street Yard. Couldn't be more local.
Brilliant, thank you.
He's also done work on the Wreath Home, I believe. Is Adrian watching?
Hello.
Yes, here's Adrian.
Hello, Adrian.
Here. I'm just trying to stick a pizza in the oven. Sorry. Yes, Pete did some work for us in our house, which is also an eco house, only a stone's throw from this beautiful house. Yeah. So I
And
recommend
it is
it.
indeed a beautiful house you built, yes. We once crashed it at Christmas, do you remember?
You came round.
Mandy and I were snooping, and we found in the building site, and we found you sitting in there having drinks. And you
Well,
and showed us around.
It's lovely to see your build, and I look forward to coming to see your house at some stage. And but no, I'm very impressed that you managed to shoehorn what beautiful house you've got onto such a, the access issues were huge, I would guess.
I mean, a word of thanks to our neighbours, because they were absolutely brilliant. You know, in fact, the ones to one side just gave us free run of their side passage and garden. Said, "Get on and do it." We've had this lump here for 30 years.
Yeah.
And just amazing. You know, if we'd had difficult neighbours, I don't know what we'd have done.
Well, I'm wondering, Mark, did you work hard on the PR with the neighbours? I'm guessing you did.
Yes, no, we didn't hide from them. Yeah, and we did work. We had an open day, and so not everyone was that happy with it. We had, someone was worried. In fact, one chap was worried that because we were lowering the roof at the back, he'd be able to see the stanchions of the football stadium. Not often you hear about people actually making your view better. Complaining about, So we had to tread very carefully and manage expectations. But by and large, everyone's been very happy. And now we don't hear, we're on speaking terms with everyone. That can't be a bad outcome, can it?
No, that's great. No, well done for doing that, because doesn't always work like that, does it?
No, however hard you try, you can't. It's not a process you can control, really, is it?
Yeah, and the thing is, when you're building a house that you're going to live in,
yeah,
you've got those 9 neighbours to have Christmas drinks with forevermore.
Yes.
Well,
or not.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
So, Mark, I'm afraid that we need to close up now so that we finish more or less on time. But if anyone still has more questions, and there's going to be a bit of time for more discussion after this, but we're going to just wind up now. I'm going to let you know about what's coming up with Open Eco Homes. So there will be more online tours in September and October, including Adrian Reith's house, who he was just talking then, a house made by Balfrits, or made in a Bavarian factory and assembled amazingly in Cambridge. And we're also going to have 2 more webinars, one on better insulation, one on heat pumps, coming soon. So I'll give you a link where you all can get informed about those. And we hope restart our thermal imaging training in the autumn. This is rather COVID dependent, but if we can work out how to do that, we can, anyone who's interested can come and learn how to use Cambridge Carbon Footprints thermal imaging cameras, and then we'll lend them to you. So I've got two requests to you, participants. Can you give us some feedback in chat? So before you leave the meeting, please, could you write down what did you enjoy in this evening's session? What worked well for you? And could you write any suggestions for how we can improve this? Apart from having reliable broadband, that's maybe something we can't control. And another request is, could you consider making a donation to Cambridge Carbon Footprint? So this is the charity of which Open Eco Homes is a project, and we do need funding and donations to be able to carry on doing this. So if you're up for that, that would be lovely.
Yes, so we had a question on, do you have any thoughts about eco-build measures that could be incorporated into new builds, or things that the house building industry should consider?
Well, I was watching Charlie Luxton this afternoon. The RIBA published something, it was last year now, isn't it? So, on not only just on what you should be doing with the performance of the house, but what you should be doing with the materials as well. I didn't concentrate on that at all, really. Although we used a lot of natural materials, but we also used some plastics and we used brick, and some of it's a mixture of high impact materials and low impact materials. And it wasn't really the process. We thought we've got enough problems with the site to concentrate on one thing, which was energy efficiency. There is stuff out there. I can't point you straight from the top of my head because I haven't got the figures or the contact details that might be. If you go to the RIBA site, you'll find that they produce something for a blueprint for the 2030 house, sort of things you should be doing to make a genuine eco house, rather than just sort of someone a woozy, fuzzy idea of what might be an eco house. I'd point you there. We've got a few architects on board here. Benedict will know. Maybe not.
There's a related question. How did you select the builders and eco-aware tradespeople? Was that?
Yeah, well, I didn't really. The builders the services all went through one business, which was Hutty. I got them because I thought it's complicated. They would do the plumbing, the heating, and the solar panels. I thought it'd be nice to have one business doing the whole lot. Otherwise, we'd end up falling between stools. And they've been quite happy to do it. They've been fine. The basic trades like floor laying and plastering, all that sort of thing. We just got contacts, mostly very local contacts. The carpenters who worked with us right the way through from when we took over from Potton, right the way through to the end. And just a really good crew. I mentioned Duncan, but he wasn't the only one. There was just people that mostly were friends of Duncan. They were just sort of people that knew each other. They're just bright guys. Carpenters often are. They think they have to think in 3D and they work hard. And I'm just amazed at how enthusiastic they were just getting into like he's doing these looms in Sydney. I've never seen anything like that before. Doesn't matter if you're an eco tradesman or not. The air tightness stuff, no one had a clue about that. So you just said, well, it's common sense. It's, you just got to fill up every gap, every joint, make sure it doesn't leak. There's no magic to it. So there was no selecting eco tradesmen as such. We just went around and found people who were good to work with, and by and large they all were. And in fact, one of the companies said, "Well, I also do decorating." He also did the decorating. Fine. He was. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got this card here. Hang on. Matt. It's on the list on the Matt here. That's right. Very good. It just on the list you hand out, Tom, the open eco houses, all the contacts are all there. People that worked on it. Anyone who isn't any good isn't on there. I've gone dead again.
There was a question about how easy it was to deal with Potton.
With Potton, they weren't bad. They weren't perfect, but they weren't bad. They were. It was quite a complicated job for them. They like to do open. It's a complicated for anybody, quite honestly. And the guy that runs it, Paul Newman, I've known him for a while. And he said, "Yes, we can do this. It won't be easy." They've never used one of these big jib cranes before, and they had quite a bit of getting their heads to shift around it. But the site crew that came to erect it were absolutely brilliant. And he another company, he said he really loved what we were doing, and just he really took to it. He made sure he was up there photographing it all, and it was a very complicated job for them. And I think they did all right, yeah.
And there were lots of questions around budget, really, because did you feel you were able to come in on budget? And as a wider question, in your experience, how affordable is it to either renovate or build an eco home in Cambridge?
Well, They're two very good questions. We basically were, I mean, we extended the budget as we went through it. I mean, as I said, my visual is never going to be less than 400k because it's going to be the complexity and the size of the house. You know, you could, you know, if you're building a really simple house on a simple site, you could probably build it for 200k. You know, but we didn't want a simple house. It was a complicated site. It was a very difficult site, so we knew it was going to be that. And we added features like this sort of sliding glazing in the kitchen and wall finish. We actually brought in and did a load of wardrobe work, load of work that wasn't even originally envisaged as building. You know, building the bin store out the front. That was 1,500 quid worth of bin store. Is that good value? You know, I mean, don't even need a bin store. You can just put dustbins there, can't you? But there's lots of little features which we wanted to, you know, turn a house into a home really. And I think it was value for money, but it was also bloody expensive. You know, it's not a cheap way of building. Is it a way of getting a cheap house? Was that the second part of the question? What would you compare it with? What's something Hill's turning out in Eddington or something like that? I don't know. Someone else had to answer that question. You know, we weren't really comparing it to anything else. We weren't trying to save money particularly. We just thought we'd build a lovely house and live in it. We could afford to do it, therefore why not do it?
So we had a Hill home in Open Eco Homes.
Yeah.
I think 2018.
Yeah.
It was a kind of apartment flat thing, maybe comparable floor area to yours, and it was 1.25 million.
Yeah, I mean, we hadn't even known this house valued. I've no idea what we get for it on the open market. So that wasn't our aim. We weren't trying to save money particularly. We were trying to build a home, you know, and we could afford it. So that, as far as I was concerned, that's all. You know, that's what we achieved that objective.
There's also a question as on liability. So as principal contractor, you take on the liability. Did you get NHBC or Zurich at the end of the project?
No, we didn't use a warranty. You don't only need a warranty if you're taking a mortgage, and we weren't mortgaging it, so we didn't get a warranty. So that was a bit of red tape we managed to skip over. We did have to do party wall acts with the neighbours. We had quite a lot of we had to insure the site. That was quite complicated because they wanted to know about it. But the warranty, we actually have an architect's certification. You can do that as an alternative route. So Mole signed it off and said this house has been built and we approved the standard it's been built to. We used them right the way through to they were doing inspections as well. Far more useful than the building inspections were very minimal. The service we had from the City Council Building Control was actually rather disappointing. We had 8 different inspectors came to site over the course of the 3 years. You know, rarely did one come more than twice, and they pulled up different things, you know, and they were perfectly happy with it. But it's not the service you really want from a building control.
Well, if there's no further questions from everyone else, I think thank you to Mark again. It's been really interesting, and thank you everyone for attending. Really interesting evening.